Hello everyone, welcome back to another lecture on the course Python Fundamentals, Building Blocks for Aspiring Developers. We will continue with the ninth module, that is working with external APIs. According to our agenda, we are at the 35th day where we will have a look at how to build a simple web scraper so we can scrape data from websites. So let's begin. So what is web scraping? So web scraping allows us to extract data from websites programmatically. That is, we can program it instead of doing it manually. So it allows us to collect data from web pages and then we can convert it into suitable formats that we can process on afterwards. The suitable formats being JSON or maybe lists or any of those we can manipulate and calculate statistics on. So why do we need web scraping? Well, it is used for various purposes such as market research, data analysis, content aggregation, all these things. So for example, you have some service that gives you information about the finances going on around the world, maybe stock market, something like that. You can download the data from the API of maybe let's say last 2 years. You can see the you can see the you can do the research and see what kind of trends are there. Then you can make your decision. Similarly, for data analysis, you need loads of data. You can scrape the websites, get data, and then perform some analysis and these sort of things. It can also be a powerful tool to gather a lot of information or content available on the internet. For example, social media services or websites such as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Reddit. So these have a lot of content generated on everyday basis. So sometimes for some studies or research or some project, we might need uh, some some data from these sort of websites, and then we can scrape the data of them. Now, a lot of them don't provide an API or are not free, but still they have some sort of an option to be able to scrape the data from them. So in Python, we build a simple web scraper using libraries like requests and beautiful soup. So we already know what request does. That is, it is used to send HTTP requests to web pages and get the response. Now, beautiful soup is a different sort of a library. It basically works and scrapes data um, from the websites that do not provide an API. So what it does is that it downloads the entire HTML structure of the website. So in the HTML, everything is written there, and then it breaks down the HTML into different elements and then gets the data and stored that. This is a much more hectic thing to do if we compare it to APIs. And there's also a bit of a, you can say, ethical dilemma because some web services or websites do not provide an API because they do not want their data to be downloaded or scraped. So in that case, some people still download the data using Beautiful Soup, but that is, you can say, not so good or not so ethical. But in some ways, for example, some public websites, some public data stores, these sort of things where they do not have an API, but still it is free to use, open to everyone. It's public. Then if they don't have an API, you can use Beautiful Soup to download it. But for now, we will only stick to requests because yeah, we'll see how it goes in that one. So here's an example. So in this one, we will be using Reddit and we'll try and scrape some data of Reddit using the APIs. So here's an example of Reddit. So it's the same as we did last time. I've just changed the URL for Reddit, um, and we have added some headers. So I got these headers from Reddit, their API documentation, and I just included it. Now, one other thing I want to tell you is about the parameters. So sometimes, or in today's age, most of the times, most of the APIs have parameters. They allow different parameters. So what parameters do is that they allow us to filter the data in some sort, provide some inputs or queries or some parameters per se to the to the service that okay, I want the data according to these parameters. So for example, in this one I've said that I want this subreddit to be Python. I don't want all the subreddits. I only want to limit the data received to 5 data rows or 5 posts. So this is how I can provide that to the API. So what it does is that instead of me downloading the data and then searching myself, filtering it out myself, the API does it for me. The API endpoint does it for me, and we can know these parameters from the API documentation of the web service or the website that we're using. So once we have the parameters, we can then in the send request put the parameters, and the API request will be sent according to the parameters. So let's begin. So first I want to open up VS Code. Um, I have this URL written here. Um, So let's begin. So first what I will do is that I will import requests, right? And then I wanna define some parameters that I will be using. So parameters are defined as a dictionary. Um, so the first one I wanna use is subreddit, and I want to say subreddit should be Python. Then I want to say sort, and then I want to say from the top. Then I want to say limit, and let's say I want to limit to 5 results only. Now where do I get these parameters like subreddit, sort, limit? So this is the key and this is the value. So what I do is that I simply go to their website, their API documentation, and I read it here. What do they have? So on this one you can see they have lots of API endpoints to deal with your own account, to deal with captcha, emojis, collections. There's a lot of API endpoints out there. So they provide a lot of data, Reddit. So for the one that I would be interested in, let's say maybe this one, I can just go there and see what how I can do something. I can read about it, and then I can see okay what sort of things we have, what parameters can I do, if there's any API key required, these sort of things. I can just look at it from their API documentation. Now, all of the services that have an API, they do have an API documentation, and it's recommended. In fact, it is not possible for you to create a web scraper without reading the documentation because you will not know what parameters to use, what endpoints to use. So once you decide on a project, just read the API documentation and then start on the project. So from the API documentation, I know that this is also one of the parameters, so is this, and so is this, and then I can put that here. So now in the URL, this is the URL, but I've put in it like this. So this subreddit goes over here, and this sort value goes over here. So this then forms a complete URL that we will use. So once we have the URL, we want to send a request. So I want to say response is equal to requests dot get. So the first one is the URL, and the second one is the headers. So we have headers in this case. So this is the headers, and the value is, and then finally I can say parameters. These are the parameters, and now let's check the response. So let's say if response dot status code is equals to 200, then we can say data is equals to response dot JSON. The same thing, we are converting the data into JSON. Else I want to print the error. So I say, okay, you have an error, and I just want to print the status code. So that's all. So let's quickly run this to see if we have an error. Okay, no error. I haven't printed anything, so we don't see anything over here. So once we have this, we can extract the different information. So let me print the data for you real quick. So this is the data that they have. See, there's a lot of data, right? Now, you can see um, what fields you want, like subreddit or self text or things like that. So for example, I already have some figured out. So let's say for post in data, and I want to go into this data, and from there I want to go into children, and then I can say post data is equals to um, post, and then there is data. Okay, so once we are here in children and then in the data, so it seems a bit complex, this structure, but once you get used to it, of dealing with the JSON structure and dictionaries, it will become much more easier. So I can also simply print the post data for now for 5 of those. So this is the post data. So it's still a lot of mess because there's a lot of data sets. So you can see is video, media, number of cross ports, these sort of things. So what I've done is that I've already identified five of the things that we can do. So the first one I've said is the title. So I can say post data, and here I can say title. So I will just copy paste this one and just change the values. So after the title, we also have author, then we also have a score, then we also have a URL, right? So we have everything over here. Now if we run the data, so we should get this thing. Let me quickly add a backslash n over here. Yeah. So the title is how to create architecture diagrams. This is the author, this is the score, this is the URL for this post. This is another one. This is another author. This is another data row. So maybe if you have some other sort of subreddit and you're trying to do a market research, you can download the data what people are posting, and from there you can see the trends. We can also even copy this. So this says how to create architecture diagrams. Let's just see if it is correct. How to create architecture diagrams. So you see, this is what it gave us, this post, right? Similarly, it has the URL. It also has a lot of other information that we might be able to extract. But for the purpose of this lecture, this one is enough because now we know how we can scrape data off the website, right? So that was all in this lecture. We saw how we can scrape data off different websites using their APIs. A lot of them provide APIs, and we can just automate the process to download data. We can change the parameters. We need to see the API guide or API documentation for the service that we're going to use to be able to make a more efficient, more better, and working Python script. So I would suggest that you keep on practicing. You can start off with Reddit because it has a lot of API endpoints and a lot of information, and that will really help you to understand how this works. And this brings this lecture to an end. So goodbye, and we'll see you in the next one.